So I wouldn't go to somebody who I see smokes and then say, hey, you got addiction, come follow me and see me. Like that, then I think everybody will run away from me.
Let's not do that.
We have established a good baseline that, addiction really just means that you got into a position where you can no longer control, where you can no longer do that, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit more about like how coping in itself is just the highest level of the problem, right? Or the highest level of the manifestation. This is just a mechanics, but what is more important is to understand what is underneath, right? Like, when do you get into a position when you cope, right? When the problem gets wild, right? When you cannot readily solve the problem. So generally everyone copes, right? In that sense. Yeah, it's just not to the level of like being addicted lah.
So in coping, right, then, like, when do you kind of draw the line between, so for example, right, like with
McFlurry, McFlurry.
Right. So
McFlurry.
Like do you kind of like just cold turkey, like, bam, I can never have a McFlurry again? Or is it kind of like something that can be managed, right? Because you see, this is where it gets complicated between addictions. Like, this is where I feel as if different addictions should be treated differently. Because like going back to that, or like even going back to my example with cigarettes and smoking, right?
Yep.
Then if I go and get a prescription for nicotine gum, right, I'm feeding a problem again, right? Then but at the same time, it's a way for me to kind of cope. Like, how do I kind of cut? That's the...
Well, this one's let me try to, I don't know whether this is the right answer, but I'll give it a go. Just now earlier, you talked about the psychological dependence aspect of things, and then there's the physical dependence of things. Right. So if you want to talk about nicotine, we know that there's a physical dependence on that. And the body will crave it, the brain will crave it, and to live in craving is as good as suffering. So how long can you suffer before you give in? So I think there's that component where the patch or the gum helps with you staying away from the cigarette. That said, by you turning to the gum or the patch, I do feel that a lot of other things you have disrupted. For example, the rituals of lighting up. The place that you do it, is it coupled with your coffee, or is it something that you have with your drink? Do you do it with your friends, or maybe mahjong session? All this has been kind of untangled.
Mahjong has a whole package in itself.
And I guess that's also like a very key part of this disrupting that cycle, right? And that can be applied to all the other addictions as well, where just you need to disrupt the...
Yeah. And so whether somebody is adopting a social lens to it, like, this is a social activity and he's addicted to a social activity, or is this something which is a cigarette, or are they mutually exclusive, or are they more intertwined? This is something for somebody to be honest, only they know the answer to it, and for them to continue to test it. So I think in terms of approach, I wouldn't say that there's the best approach, but I learn a lot from individuals who are in recovery, because especially those who are much later in their life, because I believe that they have life experience, they have addiction experience, they have recovery from addiction experience. So they're really an encyclopedia for me. And the thing that I took away from them is that can see it in terms of different phases. So the first phase is stopping. Can I even stop? And for some people, they're really stuck in the cycle and they can't stop. So perhaps maybe that's a good entry point. Maybe it's not a lifelong sobriety that they're looking for, but can they even try 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? Let's see. Because you say no problem, then no problem, you can try to stop.
Is there an ideal time frame for this detox and abstinence?
There are some recommended guidelines, but from a clinical perspective, and from my own clinical perspective, I feel that I can prescribe a certain time, but whether somebody wants to follow through,
you will not know
up to them, right?
And the last thing that I want is them to give me an answer to make me feel happy as a clinician.
Then at what point does it become appropriate to actually give to medicate it? Is it like, I mean, you're treating the psychological part, then
maybe I'll try to address that later, but first I'll talk about the stopping first, right? So the stopping is just to see what reactions will pop out. Yeah, whether is it psychological in nature, is it depression, is it anxiety, or is it physical withdrawal, shakings, and depending on what substance the person is using. So that's to have an inroad to see what kind of reactions will come out. Then stopping is one phase. Staying stopped is a different phase altogether.
Yeah.
Because somebody who really wants to stop, I know how to lock myself in a room, just detox myself, just ask people to provide me my meals, make sure that I don't,
under the door.
or maybe check in the hospital, and they have all these measures in place to stop for me. So stopping is one thing, but staying stopped is a whole different process. And I feel that is when we start to see, wow, what continues to linger. Is the person turning suicidal? Is somebody experiencing psychosis? Are they falling into deep depression and they can't start their engine to try to live life on life terms, And so this is where medication might step in, more support, not only medical support, but social support, family support, professional support can help somebody with that, helping them through this staying stop phase. And I think, as mentioned earlier, the addiction, the addictive substance or the behavior is just the top layer. So staying stop allows somebody to, okay, now you don't have the top layer, what's actually underneath? Is it dealing with stress? Is it dealing with anger? Is it dealing with emotions that I don't like? Is it dealing with trauma? Don't know. Is it dealing with boredom, loneliness? Who knows?
Boredom's
Yeah.
sometimes.
And we are in an increasingly stimulating society and world with technological advances as we speak. So our brain we do not know the full capacity of our brain, but now we are actually taking a pause and see how the brain is reacting. And what happens is, staying stop, you start to be more aware of what is the real struggles behind that. And that's the second phase. And the third phase, hopefully what will come out is, not only do I learn how to deconstruct some hardwired ways of dealing with things, but I also have the ability to give myself more pathways on
to
how
rewire new habits.
To deal life on life terms with other ways.
I think that for certain kinds of addictions, right, like having more alternatives outside of just stopping, right, makes a lot of sense to me. Right, we've already seen that with kind of like casinos and how, like, they've come to some sort of uneasy balance, right? Just don't have it in the country at all. Obviously you don't want to encourage a gambling problem, right? Same thing with kind of cigarettes. Such a problem, just make the whole damn thing illegal. But you know what happens when that happens? Black market.
Yeah, correct.
Right? So then we are seeing the same problems with things like vapes. And it's an issue for me, because as someone who's trying to quit, I have no option. If I can't quit in the next kind of 2 to 3 years or whatever, it's risk getting lung cancer or buying black market stuff to try and kind of reduce my risk. So this is where I was coming from, the harm reduction question. Is it possible to manage addictions?
I feel a little bit caught up with having difficulty, because there's this part where you're talking about the stimuli, which is the cigarette or other substances. And then there's this other part, which is addiction. So I like to try to untangle both, because I don't think anybody who smokes is addicted. Because I know that there are people who are recreational smokers, social smokers, or even they might become they use it regularly, but it might not have what we see more of appetitive, a disease of not enough, more and more and more. So I wouldn't go to somebody who I see smokes and then say, hey, you got addiction, come follow me and see me. Like that, then I think everybody will run away from me.
Let's not do that.
So I think it's more along the lines of, if let's say we can understand that there are some substances, there are some behaviors or some activities which have a very high addictive potential.
Right.
And when I describe about addictive potential, is because it definitely it has that function, to give a spike in the brain, the dopamine levels, boom, go up, and whether it is following crypto or having a game and loot boxes in the games, or and these are things that we don't really talk much
loot
about.
Boxes, man, there's a total can of worms, but yes.
And so if we see in that format, then we can understand how potentially dangerous these substances are. Does it mean that anybody who touch get hooked? That is a very preventative, safe message that we can give to the younger ones. Hey, don't touch, the one you cannot hook, you cannot let go. So that's one approach. Not talking about policies, but in this part of the world, Singapore at least, we are trying to focus on trying to safeguard and protect the young, because their brain is still very suggestible, very malleable, and we don't want them to be exposed too quickly.
Youth initiation of a lot of these things is actually a big problem, big risk.
Yeah. But in terms of the management wise, whether in the interventions in professional settings, I know of individuals who, for example, they use hard drugs. And because the withdrawals is such a difficult experience for them, to the point that the word traumatic experience is used. Cold turkey is not fun for somebody who's on hard drugs and is trying to wean off it. And so because it's so traumatic, they
relapse.
They relapse. No choice. They have to go back and use what is to help them feel a sense of normalcy, a sense of okayness. In that sense, definitely I do feel that there's a role for medication to help somebody, maybe not necessarily to substitute like a nicotine patch, what it does for cigarettes, but maybe with the withdrawal management, whether it's the diarrhea that comes or the sleeplessness and whatnot. So that can help somebody through that difficult phase.
So by managing the withdrawal symptoms, it's then easier for them to stop and stay stopped.
Or it encourages the notion to them that it can be done.
Because otherwise, on its own, without medication, it might be too painful for the individual to even want to go through it.
No, but and that's the whole carrot and stick kind of situation, right? Like certain things you're gonna do it's gonna be very painful, and to reduce the pain, there's no easy way to reduce the pain, right? So you try to incentivize yourself in a different way, trick your mind into doing it, right? So that's the baseline of what a lot of management books try to teach you, right? You want your guys to do this path, and it's very difficult. There is no way around this path, so you use other ways to motivate them, right? To get them down the path.
It's a controversial discussion because like depending on who you're speaking to, it's either a black or white thing, or there's some room for grey.
No, but that's the whole policy.
Yeah. But I mean, if you talk to someone like, most people here in Singapore, at least, like, if you encounter someone who's a heroin addict, you just, better quit or die.
No, but I get where you're coming from though. If I could share, right? I mean, I am really quite addicted to chocolate. I need it every day. But it was a problem. So it went from having benefits to negative benefits when I saw my weight ballooning. And then my skin was breaking out. So now it was very negative. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. And I think like me telling myself to stop was making it worse, because it's like I craved the forbidden food, Then what happened was, in the end, I just kept trying to adjust. So I tried the fade out method, helped a little bit, but I still needed my daily chocolate. At least it wasn't like a whole bar, but down to like bite-sized pieces. But one thing that I found helped, which you said when you talk about symptoms, right? One of my withdrawal symptoms was my taste buds just crave for the taste. So something that I tried was, since the problem wasn't the chocolate per se, but the sugar in it, the calories and all that weight, I came across this thing called chocolate tea bags.
Oh, I've seen those.
Yeah, and actually they're more pricey than normal chocolate. But since I was trying to solve the problem and not have to stop entirely, right, it's spoken like a true chocolate addict. I shoot myself, okay? But yeah, so I actually tried that and it helped. It helped me to manage, because I craved that chocolate. I would drink that chocolate tea. It's 0 calories, but it helped to reduce that withdrawal, and then I was able to stop. But then after that, then got comfortable. Then my weight went down. Like, okay, I can start again. And then I relapse. Right? Yeah. But I think it makes total sense though.
Yeah. And ultimately, where is the end point? I think I like to see recovery, because that now we talk about the flip side of the thing, is that addiction is where the person maybe has started and came forward to want to make the decision to make a change or seek help for it. And the ideal thing is stop, then all your problems are solved. But you stop, you got a different set of stopping problems that pop up. And so I like to think of recovery as it's so much more. It's not what you stop or what you give up, but actually what you take up. And so there's two folds to it, because if I only focus about, my whole life is geared strategizing how to stop, what kind of life is that? It's quite a mundane life. But if I start to look forward and start to build things like the trust that I get, the relationships that I get back, my functioning, my productivity, and my creativity can be channeled in a different way. Once it booms, then you grow something so nicely why would you want to go back to something that takes it away?
Yeah.
And so the focus just switches.
So it's really a whole mindset shift. Instead of focusing on what you have lost or what you are no longer having, you focus on what are you adding and getting more of by giving up this one thing.
But I think we also need to add that it's not a simple shift.
Yes.
Like a lot of people use mindset shift, just change.
But mindset shifts are not simple, right? Easier said than done.
The thing that really would help also is how society actually perceives addiction also. It's, I mean, like, I don't think I'm overstating this, but like, you know, you just Singaporeans in general, right? Like when you talk about someone who has an addiction, right? It's like, quit or die. You know, that is the mindset here. Like, you know, like, so when you start kind of like looking at it from like a multivariate point of view where, you know, you're talking about things like, you know, using medication to treat the addiction, harm reduction, or like, you know, like looking at it as a long drawn out process, right? Well, people can't understand it.
That's why we talk about it, right?
It's a frustration.
Let me share you my personal experience, right? So for my dad has a gambling problem. Right, and it's not just him. I think it runs quite deep in the family, right? A lot of people have it, and I think habits do pick up over the generations, right? So those things are real, right? We don't go there, but for a long time, I judged him, right? I was like, you are causing a lot of problems, you know, blah, 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 blah. Until I started realizing that I am also doing the whole addiction thing, but just on sugar, right? So I am using a different way to cope with the complex problem that I'm struggling with. So when I start to realize that, right, then I'm like, so who am I to then judge that his method or her method is inferior to mine? When actually both of us, we're just trying to do something that we are familiar with to cope with the complex situation. Right?
The only difference is that one is being labeled by the society and the government as negative, whereas yours isn't really
not so,
at that stage yet.
And to be fair, to be fair, I think just now we did talk about the long-term negative impact. Right? So structurally, certain things do have longer-term negative impact as compared to like maybe eating, not that eating sugar don't have but you know, we're talking about...
There is a public health.
So
it affects more than just the person.
Exactly.
Themselves.
So it's about morality. It's about where you measure these things, right? What is considered good and bad, right? But the idea here is certain things have bigger impact than other things, right? But what I am pushing is to realize that it's all the same, in a sense that they are all just trying to do something, right? And that something is to cope with a complex situation today that you don't have an easy solution to solve. And by inputting that into people's mind, then you start realizing, actually,
you know what you guys said just made me realize something. Mark, you were talking about how, like, you know, some are just how it's being viewed by society as negative. I just started to realize the ones that are being viewed as negative, harmful addictions are all those that have a damage on beyond the person themselves. So alcoholism, it damages property, it damages people when you get into fights. Smoking, public health, second degree cancer, and then what else? Drugs, right? And then you go in, you get abusive, you lash out at people. So actually, I think gambling also, and then your family, you know, because of the financial debts and all, it all collapses. So it's only those that really have more than the individual that then starts to get legalized and hence get perceived negatively. But we're not at that stage yet with social media or sugar addictions or chocolate addiction.
Well,
because
video gaming is definitely getting a lot of
loot boxing is quite nuts.
Because actually they all fall under the gaming industry. And whether it's casino, gambling, or gaming,
they're all tricking the same mechanics. They're all playing the same
consumerism
thing.
is the same as
but
well.
do they have that much spillover effect?
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm, but even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Now back to the show. Oh my god, wait, let me just talk about the consumerism thing, okay? Retail therapy is not therapy. Once and for all. Put it out there. Retail is retail.
And then now you always buy now, pay later kind of like things, right? You can really like just like
retail therapy is just a coping mechanism.
Exactly. So it's not therapy. Please don't anyhow use the word anymore. It doesn't heal you.
But it also could be that some of these things are just fairly new, right? I've always felt that if alcohol was a recent discovery, there is no chance in hell that it's legal. It's just that the cat has been let out of the bag already, so they can't put it back in. You know,
And
like
I
you
guess
have
that, like, over time, it showed that it had this spillover effect. That's why they
like,
have
you know, like, so like when you
But then doesn't agree.
But then how about cannabis though?
yeah.
yeah,
Cannabis, I would argue cannabis has a longer history than alcohol, whether it's documented or not, because that thing is a natural growing shit. There's
Okay,
no complex
yeah.
process in developing
So
it.
I think it's not so
True.
much.
Good point.
And again, I wouldn't want to go walk down Clarke Quay and hey, come you see me,
Yeah.
everybody. So it's to each or to their own, and ultimately they only they themselves understand, because I know of individuals who, because I like to keep track of how people are doing even though after they have come out of therapy with me, just to find out how they're doing in life. And a lot of times they would share with me about back then. They share a little bit about what was some of their struggles, but they never really felt comfortable telling anyone. And a lot of times they would say that, Sandor, you don't know, man. I know that I shouldn't be taking. I know that I will disappoint people. I know that I will beat myself up after it, but I cannot stop myself. So that's when I know we've been talking about addiction, and I really appreciate how we want to have a more normal view towards addiction so that people can start asking themselves the question. But also, I want to give addiction the due respect that it has, because it's not something to be joked around with,
It's
because
true.
once you reach that level, it's really a battle between the person and their brain. And hence, the way that I like to see recovery is the person's own choice and responsibility to take ownership and learn how to deal with their brain. This doesn't happen overnight. This happens whether it's I learn how to stop first, how to stay stopped, learning how to practice new things, to how to deal with life. And ultimately, it's not like, oh, because I'm your therapist, I'm putting a gun to your head and say you shouldn't smoke, or you shouldn't take drugs, or you shouldn't gamble. Is ultimately what I hope is that maybe that's my role in the beginning, but and you needed me, because how are you going to fight your own brain? Your brain is your motherboard. In some ways, you're going about your addiction in a zombie-like state. So I needed to step in and be that safeguard for you. But ultimately, I wouldn't want to do this for the rest of my life. And ultimately, I don't think it's fair, because I would rather empower you. And so the focus shifts on how the person puts the gun to their own head to monitor how they are managing that brain.
So recovery never ends. Essentially, that's the idea.
Once an addict, always an addict, kind of thing.
Well,
No.
definitely. I feel that we know enough from neuroscience that even though the brain is hardwired, and by not using those, not engaging in such activities or not using those brain circuitry, basically it will dwindle down. But the fact of the matter is that the foundations has been built already.
So I mean, it's my case, right? It's I know that I am addicted to this thing. Right. But I will never say by objective standards today that I'm addicted to it. It's just a mechanics that I'm very familiar with, and I know that it will solve my short-term,
it's
issues.
like a life hack.
Yeah, it's like a life hack. So I have no qualms with it. I don't judge myself for like eating that McFlurry. I'll just take it, but I know it's a signal, something's happening, you gotta do something about it. So it's really about working with yourself such that you do not get to the level. And I think most of our listeners will not be structurally considered an addict. But they are natural pointing. I said, but
it is true. I think I'm the one with like some addictions.
But many people will have addictive behaviors or like very intense coping behaviors. That actually the idea here is to realize that it's about recognizing that they exist and try to realize it is telling you something beneath. That if you can solve that permanently, you're done. And one of the things that I did was to shift out, because that was a big problem that was causing me to do all these other coping mechanisms. Once I shifted myself out of the home,
you were eating less McFlurries.
I suddenly don't need any of that.
So you solve the underlying problem.
Exactly, and that is the part that is important. Not about whether public policy coming or not, but you realizing that this is just coping, there is an underlying problem, and if you can solve that underlying problem, the problem at the top does not exist anymore.
But that's a self-awareness. I have a very important question. That's not your name, don't worry. So especially with addictions which have not yet gone into that sphere of being legalized or banned outrightly and classified as being bad. Like as parents, we have to raise kids, and these kids nowadays are all being, they're literally being given and shown social media right in front of them. All these tools that are literally designed to make them hooked, to make them addicted. But technology and policy has not yet caught up with technology and the application. So how can parents who especially are not trained psychologists, what can we do to help our children manage this, especially since they don't have that self-awareness yet, they don't have that brain developing it, they're still young, teenagers and all. What can we do?
Follow China. China limit gaming hours.
Yeah.
Right? If you are a concerned parent, then if this is such a problem, then China limit gaming hours. But and then you say, it's a freedom of rights. How can you limit my choice? But it is essentially the government that's coming down to say that, okay, this is a problem. I think we all realize, okay, so 没有了. Right? And then we let the kid develop. Right? But anyway, let the psychologist say.
I do believe that the safeguards do help. But also we know that it becomes the forbidden fruit, right? And being humans, we like to outsmart the system.
Yeah, the more the mom and dad say no gaming, the more the kid finds a way.
I will log into my neighbor's Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly. So how can parents manage that without making it worse and fueling that addiction until it really goes over?
I think the first thing is to shatter their dreams from the start first. Just tell them, know that number one, you're never ever going to be a professional gamer, right? This is probably a 1 in a million kind of thing.
They'll prove you wrong.
Maybe they really will become a professional
And that would be quite cool, right? Interview your kid in 20 years time.
But you see, that's also the pipe dream that, the thing about esports is this, right? It is just like any other professional sport. The people you see on stage, right, they're like 1 in a million, It's like, it's like being an NBA star, It just allows you, it's off topic, but it just makes you think it's achievable because it's very accessible. Like you don't need to be 6'5" and muscular to kind of do it, but you still need to be really talented. Anyway,
but I think the young mind, from a developmental psychology point of view, the young mind at that stage, is all a fantasy, right? It's all imagination. It's illusion of control. And say, I am that one. I am the NBA superstar. What are you talking about?
The future is not yet written.
And you say you want to prove me, then you have to give me 20 years to show you, ma. So
then if they really become like some esports star that I die, I was like,
I will interview him, man. I was like,
this is why
let me show you 20 years ago what your dad said.
So I knew all along that you had the potential. That's why
It's so supportive, man.
So rather than outrightly banning and making them crave it more, what can parents do to help?
I feel like, let's say if we switch back the tone back to addiction, right? What I notice, and I think this has enough research behind it, is that it is also seen as a condition of isolation, secrecy, and disconnection. So if I understand that that's what addiction feeds on, because maybe drinking was with friends in the beginning, and then it became in the pubs, and then it became in house party, and then it became in my room, and then becoming alone. Or even if I did it, there's this part which I'm not telling people. So there's a lot of secrecy behind. So sometimes the carrot and stick method works, but it also might drive into that more secrecy, and that's even harder to draw out, right? So if let's say I don't know the exact answer to it, but I like to think, okay, if this is very good in one end, let's see what's the other end like. And then we try to find the balance. So I think it's really trying to find connections, understanding what is the motives, what's the functions to it. Remember, if alcohol was doing so much crap for me in the beginning, why would I want to pursue a lifetime with it? I wouldn't want to. So understanding what's the reasons behind, what's the motivations behind. Could it be because I needed more stimulation, I needed more thrill, couldn't deal with boredom, I feel lonely, I was being bullied at school, or whatever, I don't know, or peer pressure, I don't know. So understanding from that point, because what we know is that the brain, we are only scratching the surface of what we understand from the brain. And I don't know how long it will take before we fully understand the brain. But what we know is that the technology is feeding our brain at a much faster rate than what we have been evolutionary up till now, where we are at with our brain. So am I anti-technology? No, I'm not. But I'm just thinking like, for somebody who's a young person, how can I get to understand why they're engaging it? Are they spending too much time? Is their relationship with their phone more than me as a parent?
Likely so.
And could we balance that out a bit
Yeah.
more? Because I'm not saying take away the phone, because they'll definitely find a way to find the phone.
And then now they hate you more. Right? And then the thing becomes more complicated, harder to build a relationship with you, such that you take their attention instead of the phone.
I think to me it's always been isn't okay. I think at a very young age, I mean, I'm sure you understand this when your kid sees the screens, right? They get really transfixed.
Yeah.
Right. But I think what is more troubling for me going forward actually is the kind of content that it's just the stuff that's out there now is wild, you know. It's like really like I feel as if like not that this didn't exist when I was growing up, it's just a lot more
accessible,
you know. It's just crazy.
And also I think the fact that because we do not, I mean, last time what break password, now any 2-year-old can crack your iPhone password already. So the technology, the brain has an appetite. And obviously we are programmed for novelty, for stimulation, and there's law of diminishing returns, right? If I see the same video too much, give me something new, right? So if the stimuli that the person is engaging allows for that, then we do not know what is the end of it, and then it's harder to control it and taper it back because the brain has the appetite.
Would you say like teaching kids and helping them to become like calmer, or putting in moments of meditation, doing calm activities together would help? Because a lot of the young kids, especially, their brains, like you said, feed on these stimuli. That's why Coco Melon is so popular, right? So as parents, would that help? Like if we help them to be a bit more calmer, so then they might hopefully become more sensitive to that stimuli instead of becoming desensitized and keep craving more and more to meet the same high.
I got advice for all parents. Go out with your kids without your phones. Can you start with that? Because that is what I did. I mean, I don't have parents, but when I don't have kids, but when I go out I do that. I do.
You know, there's the dog electroshock collar.
No lah, you know, but more like I will go out, you know, and without my phones, like no electronics, and then you start to look at you will find stimulus, but not on that screen. You will start to find stimulus from that bird chirping, you know, that thing crossing the road, or you will find it's inherent in the mind to find what stimulates you, right? It's just now not confined within the screen, right? And I think for parents, you know, an easy hack, just go out with your kids without your phones.
Would that help?
I do feel that, I mean, only in recent times then we had the technological advances and high-speed internets and whatnot. So I do agree with that. But
psychologists agree. Like, I approved by psychologists. Yes.
I also like to think of it as when you mentioned about whether there can be some meditative practices to do with kids. I can just imagine a kid like, what's this? I cannot sit still. I'm ADHD.
But meditative stuff can be like what you say. Maybe you go to the garden and kick the ball.
Yeah, it could be.
That's lovely.
Not down there, I must say. The garden, but like sticking the stimuli from other stuff rather than through the screen.
Yeah, I think that definitely works, because we know that when somebody is fully immersed in the moment, then they are very mindful about what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're tasting. So I think that's great. Perhaps maybe, I don't know whether this answers your question, but I do feel that the kid is still growing. They have no emotional regulation, is still in development.
Yeah.
And so we know that we are social beings, and the people closest to them, their caregivers, their parents, can co-regulate them. So that means that it's not necessarily that you sit down with me, let's do meditation, namaste, but
I love how namaste is a joke these days.
I'll probably be short as a
cancer hit.
But more along the lines of how you can think of it as, how am I dealing with my emotions as a parent when I'm interacting with my child who is flustered, who is unsettled? And I have the ability to model that. I have the ability to co-regulate them so that they can start to have a relationship with their emotions. Because underlying it, even though it seems like I've stigmatized the brain, I like to think of it as the brain is our greatest tool. that separates us from the rest of the animals. It's not because we have we have supernatural strength or whatnot. It's because we have a supernatural brain. And the part that addiction usually hijacks is the same part of the brain that is common throughout all the animal species, which is what we call the ancient brain, the primitive brain. Some people say reptilian brain, which is really about rewards, motivation, memory, and survival. And what we know is closely linked to that is emotional regulation. That part of the brain helps with emotional regulation. And then the part which makes us that we lose the ability to make informed decisions because addiction has taken place is the prefrontal cortex, which is the big part of the brain, the one that really separates us from the rest of the animals. So the brain is there to serve a purpose to help us deal with difficult moments. So it's our greatest tool set. But like our greatest strengths, our greatest strengths are also our greatest weaknesses. So when we trust our brain too much, we don't question it, we don't audit it, we allow it to do its thing, and we give you entire trust. And that's where we lose control of it, and the brain just takes over the driving wheel.
So instead of just just stimulating the brain and visual through the screen, then going outdoors, for example, and stimulating the other centers, that would help to make us more attuned to what our body is feeling versus just going with what the brain is.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another way to have a more human being, right? It's about being in all senses, all aspects.
This reptilian brain thing I've actually read, but maybe after this podcast, it's actually really interesting. But
so elevated.
Anyway,
yeah. Okay, great. I think we went on quite a whole thing, which is good. I think it's an important thing. So let's close with one last question. Okay, so the last question that I would love for everybody to answer is so we realize that this whole thing is a coping mechanism at the top, right? And it is really just you running away from the problem below, right? So with this clarity, I hope you have that clarity. What are certain actionable steps that you will do to try to understand the problem beneath, such that you can do a rug pull from the addiction?
I like what Sandor said about the detox. Because I think doing a detox, whether it's a social media detox or a chocolate detox or your McFlurry detox,
I don't eat all the time.
It helps you to then concentrate on what made you crave that in the first place. What makes you need that in the first place. And then find other ways or experiment with different ways on how you can still meet that need without going back to what you're comfortable with.
Fair point. And if after today I get a McDonald's sponsorship, then kudos to all of you. But yes.
For me, I feel like I also believe that just having a practice of abstinence will just help me see what kind of reactions come out. But more importantly, I feel like because when the addictive process has started, there's the isolation, there's the disconnection that comes out. So it's really finding ways to connect with others so that they can be my eyes, they can be checking my blind spots. And these are not just ordinary people. These are people which I know genuinely have my best interests at heart and they want the best for me. And so at times when I'm wondering whether I should trust my brain or not, at least I can trust these people because I think I put my trust in them. So learning how to connect with people and ask for help, because usually when the addictive process is there, is my problem. I'll make sure I sort out myself, then I go make friends.
Or I go connect my friends. Your producer, you should let them do the big part.
They always
then they can see, this is the impact of your McFlurry.
No. But I want to add to that, right? Because I have a bunch of friends, they are not connected, they are separated, right? But there's a bunch of people that knows a lot about me. And the information gets stacked over time, right? And eventually only the few of them will fully understand, because the backstory is too much already to tell to the next person. So I must be very invested to the next person. And these people, right, are the people that will keep me, accountable and in check. Say, hey, recently you've been doing this, blah blah blah. Do you realize? Hey, you chose me for dessert again. That kind of thing.
It's the fifth one a day already. What's going on?
Don't have. Hey, I'm gonna get a McDonald's ad. But yes, come on, last thing.
No, I mean, like, I don't know whether I can add much to that, man. That's actually really like it's having people around to hold you accountable and have your best interest, your circle. When you're not sure whether you can trust yourself, is definitely what But I guess for me, it's a bit later on in the cycle because I mean, I've been, it's been a while, So I think I can understand my addiction quite well from both like a physiological and psychological thing. Right now, it's just a question of the I guess coming to terms with some things, having some humility in the sense that like because on some days, I just tell myself that actually, what's wrong with nicotine addiction? Honestly, like if it's just a mode of delivery, then what's wrong with it? And then on some days, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like why do you like being addicted to this? You know what I mean? And then like sometimes like I'm the kind of person that the more public comms that I get that don't make sense to me, right? Like I feel I need to rebel against that. It's like that 14-year-old boy has never left this body, even though I'm like almost 40 already. So I think that to me there's more of like one of those things that I think that I have to kind of come to terms with.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and that's also why I kind of ask those questions about whether it's possible to have your cake and eat it, manage certain addictions, right? Because that's kind of like what I'm going through. Like, is it possible to,
And this is such an interesting ending because I know people that essentially it's not uncommon, but internally you have multiple personality that breaks up as a result of it, and then one side is judging the other side. It's damn interesting, and then we can. It's a precursor of like bipolar and all those things, right? So we can talk about that. If this thing blows up, we'll talk more about it. But at the end of the day, I think it's about finding the life you love, right? And learning how to work with yourself, work with your mind, what triggers you, what works with you, what environment are you, what problems are you facing. I think it's all a big part of living a life you love. Okay. Thank you guys.
Thank you
for having us on
so
this show.
wholesome, this ending. Love it.